Right, so today Israel have laid out their defence for their genocide in Gaza, and yes, I'm very much still going to call it that because their defence wasn't really aimed at the court, unless these court judges are truly stupid, and I find that hard to believe, but instead aimed at the media, because the court they're pleading to isn't the International Court of Justice so much as the Court of Public Opinion. Reinforcing that is the fact that mainstream outlets like Sky and the BBC were happily showing Israel's defence on TV in full, where they completely ignored South Africa's case being presented just yesterday. Truly impartial service. Show the majority white nation, ignore the majority black one. But it may well work out that they wish they hadn't done so, given just how terrible the Israeli defence has been. There's almost an arrogance to it, almost like believing if they show up and tell the court all the same nonsense they've been making public for the last 3 months, that they'll swallow it too. If the provisional measures South Africa have requested are not granted, then the ICJ are not a serious institution. And if Israel can turn up and basically claim Hamas made us do some genocide, but really they did war crimes first, is the basis for their defence. Right, so we thought the Israel defence at The Hague was going to be bad, but quite how bad I did not expect. They're literally pulling all the same stories, all the debunked claims that we've seen for weeks, and presented them as fact in front of a court, the world court, making me believe they are still wooing public opinion rather than pursuing any genuine legal win, perhaps because they haven't got a hope of winning and need to get their excuses in order. Well, Israel's got a track record of being treated differently to everyone else, so let's not assume anything on that score just yet. But the tone was set when the Israeli delegation all turned up wearing yellow ribbons, a not-so-subtle nod to their intention on playing the victim card, the ribbons symbolic of the yellow stars Jews were made to wear by the Nazis. I'll start with the Israeli agent who began proceedings, because he really set the tone, bringing up the Holocaust from the get-go as proof of their dedication for avoiding genocide, since it was attempted against them. In other words, very much in their traditional habit of saying, you can't challenge us, we're Israel, remember the Holocaust? But it gave an idea of where things were going to go from there. The claim was made that this war was not started by Israel, that they did not want war, and claimed self-defense against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others. They made the claim that civilian suffering was tragic. They called it heartbreaking. The claim was made that Hamas have sought to maximise civilian casualties and that Israel sought to minimise them. The agent made the case that genocide cannot be applied to them because the convention was not designed to address impacts on hostilities on civilians, even when the use of force raises serious issues, suffering and loss of life. It was set up to address malevolent crime of genocide. The agent has blamed this age of social media and identity politics, which has meant people now seek to maximise outrageous terms and vilify and demonise, and they're picking on them. This is irresistible to people, apparently, to people who would wish ill upon Israel. The agent took a swipe at South Africa, a regular thing, saying they have put forward a profoundly distorted factual and legal picture, since their case relies on a deliberately curated, decontextualised and manipulative description of current hostilities. They took another swipe at South Africa by claiming they have come to the ICJ as a guardian of humanity, but delegitimising Israel's existence, as they claim South Africa have, rings hollow, and in its description of hostilities erases Jewish history and Palestinian agency or responsibility. The agent claimed South Africa has added to the delegitimisation of Israel that has gone on since 1948, and that their words sounded indifferent from Hamas rhetoric. They accused South Africa of removing both Hamas's responsibility and the humanity of Israeli victims are removed from their view in their assertions. The agent then moved on to the events of October 7th. Of course, we had to get there eventually. They stood before the court. They claimed thousands of Hamas and other militants breached Israel's borders by land, sea and air, invading over 20 communities and the site of a music festival. What proceeded next, under the cover of fire by thousands of rockets being fired into Israel, was the wholesale massacre, mutilation, rape and abduction of as many citizens as the terrorists could find before Israel forces repelled them. They tortured children in front of parents and parents in front of children, burned people including infants alive, and systematically raped and mutilated scores of women, men and children. All told, some 1,200 people were butchered that day, more than 5,500 maimed, 240 hostages abducted, including infants, entire families, persons with disabilities and Holocaust survivors, some of whom have since been executed. many of whom have been tortured, sexually abused and starved in captivity. We know of the brutality of October 7th, he said, not only from harrowing testimonies of survivors, but from the unmistakable proof of carnage and sadism left behind and the forensic evidence taken at the scene. The claim made before the ICJ was that we know all of this because the assailants proudly filmed and broadcast their barbarism. This was the largest mass murder of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust, the agent said. Claims of Palestinian brutality made by the Israeli agent, including a farmer being burned alive with his family in their house and a woman who was raped at the Nova Festival whilst another cut off her breast and played with it. She was then shot in the head afterwards. They used a recording of claimed phone calls from a Hamas operative using a Jewish victim's phone to call their parents to tell them what they'd done as well, much like other examples we've seen of them do this that have been previously debunked. On the provisional measures South Africa have requested, the agent claimed it would stop Israel fulfilling its obligations, defend its citizens and rescue the hostages. To the 110,000 alleged internally displaced Israelis unable to go home. They also criticised the fact there was no mention by South Africa of the ongoing suffering being caused by Hamas, and treats the hostages they still hold as an afterthought, before showing a montage of people they claim Hamas have killed. They accuse South Africa of thwarting Israel's attempts to defend itself, to let Hamas get away with its murder, but leave Israel defenceless as Hamas continues. They claimed Hamas enjoys close relations with South Africa, despite them being designated a terrorist organisation by numerous other states. They had the nerve, quite frankly, to accuse South Africa of using unverified information provided by Hamas, and stood there straight-faced whilst saying Israel is upholding the law in the face of Hamas ignoring it. They say the Genocide Convention itself exists as a solemn promise to the Jewish people and all people of never again. If Israel gets ruled against or the provisional measures requested by South Africa are enforced, the agent claimed the Genocide Convention will become an aggressor's charter for terrorists who hide behind civilians at the expense of a state seeking to protect its people against them, and as such suggests the case against them be dismissed as a libel. We haven't even got to the lawyers yet, though frankly, you weren't missing out much on that front. This was expected to be a risible attempt at Israel exonerating themselves, but actually it was remarkable for being so tediously dull for the most part. South Africa's presentation was far more engaging and dynamic, and a hell of a lot more professional. Let's just do some debunking here before I move on, though. The claim Israel didn't start the war. This didn't start on October 7th. Gaza has been under siege since Hamas were elected as a government in Gaza in 2007. It's been occupied territory since 1967. You could take it all the way back to the Nakba of 1948. This war goes way back. Hamas didn't start it. Hamas didn't exist before 1987, so they need to try again if they're going to blame Hamas for literally everything. The Genocide Convention is not designed to address hostility impact on civilians, which is true in and of itself as a statement, but it was set up to address attempts to wipe people out in their entirety. This is happening. People have been forcibly displaced entirely en masse, north to south. Attempts to push these people out of Gaza have been made and have been discussed. Convoys of safety have been targeted and shot at and people killed trying to leave. And when in the south, where they've been told to go, where they were told they'd be safe, Israel's bombed them there as well. There's no evidence that Israel is trying to avoid civilian casualties. There is evidence they are trying to wipe everyone out, that they are maximising them, not minimising them. So the reverse of what the agent claimed, in my opinion, based on what I've seen is true. Blaming social media tickled me for the public opinion turning against Israel. All of a sudden, as South Africa said yesterday, the people being attacked are able to film and share their own destruction. And they're doing so. People can see for themselves the world over and make up their own minds about what is going on out there. Not only that Israel has been encouraging their own people to publish videos on TikTok as well, their own soldiers sharing what they are doing. And South Africa actually used some of that as part of their own evidence yesterday. The scale of the incursion has clearly been embellished. Hamas don't have air assault capabilities and didn't go in to Israel by sea either. They went by land. All the claims of burning people alive have been debunked after 200 bodies Israel claimed were theirs turned out to be Hamas, and they didn't realise it. It took them 6 weeks to work that out. And I don't think they're the sort of people to burn their own people. But you know who we have verified reports of and footage of people killing their own people? Yes, the IDF operating under Hannibal directives to prevent hostage taking. Kill them before they can be taken hostage. They made much of the 1,200 people killed, but investigation is leaning more and more to many of those, if not the majority, being killed by the IDF itself. 5,500 wounded, but those figures pale in comparison to those killed in Gaza, 1% of the entire population of which is now dead. Who, again, are the fault of Hamas, of course, but I'll come on to such some more presently. Claims of torture have been disputed by Israeli eyewitnesses and survivors who said they were treated well, as have hostages released, contrary to the claims here that they were starved. And of course, after all the cheap shots at South Africa, which that delegation made none of yesterday, simply sticking with facts they can actually evidence, they made what amounted to a veiled threat to the ICJ, that if they get ruled against, the genocide charter would become an aggressor's charter. Do all of the mirrors in Israel have a rose tint to them, I wonder? Anyway, let's move on to the lawyer representations, and actually only one is really worth spending any time on, though it has to be acknowledged that the first lawyer up for the Israeli delegation, a chap called Malcolm Shaw, losing his papers was literally the highlight of his testimony, as dull as that was, which I admit to nearly nodding off through, as he referenced the Bible and all manner of other global issues, giving a feeling of him defending a very large elephant in the room by avoiding talking about it. His dignity, quite honestly, going the same way as his papers, and Netanyahu's sanity, and symbolic of the entire Israeli defence, which was a shameless shambles. I might have actually found one of his papers, actually. This pretty much summed up his waffle. The most notable part of Shaw's testimony was his attempt to place context on Netanyahu's Amalek threat. Clearly something that has the Israeli legal team bothered because it's a reference to a literal biblical genocide. He only made things worse for them, if anything, by showing even more of what Netanyahu happened to say at that point. And if the words of Israel's Prime Minister are your go-to for a defence, then you're in more trouble than I originally thought. But the legal representation that really summed it all up, with its dishonesty, with what Israel frankly had the nerve to present to the ICJ, was that made by a lawyer called Galit Ragawan. She had the really annoying habit of huffing periodically throughout her testimony, seemingly for emotional effect. But it got even worse when she was later stopped and asked to slow down in her testimony because the interpreters couldn't actually keep up with her. Hers was a testimony of complaint overall, I thought. She complained about Hamas's tactics and that South Africa only mentioned them in passing when Hamas is the government in Gaza. Well, Hamas are also not a state, also not signatories to the Genocide Convention, so can't be put on trial under it for either of those reasons. But Israel can, and is, so complain about Hamas as much as you like. You need to be in the International Criminal Court for that, the ICC. It is also based in The Hague. I appreciate, given the performance of this legal team, that might have been an easy mistake for them to have made. You walked into the wrong room, maybe. Well, Ragawan complained that urban warfare will always result in death and damage, but excused it on her nation's part by saying they are exacerbated because that is Hamas's desire. I struggle to see how blowing up Gaza and levelling the place is Hamas's plan. They have to live there as well, you know. Hamas is embedded amongst the civilians, she said, and sure, they are, much like the IDF headquarters is based in downtown Tel Aviv, isn't it, Ms. Ragawan? It's also incredibly densely populated in Gaza, so there's an argument for that, sure, but is it relevant to a case of genocide when you can also argue, well, there's only so many places Hamas can literally go? I'm not so sure. Civilian deaths are the unintended but lawful outcome of urban warfare, she said. So how hard are you really trying to avoid them then with your 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on a refugee camp and the excuses given by one of your media skivvies like Elon Levy being basically, whoops, we dropped the wrong one. Well, what is the right bomb to drop on a refugee camp then? Do explain that. Well, according to Ms. Ragawan, because this is recognised under the terms of international humanitarian law, that recognises this, genocide is not therefore constituted. Many civilian deaths are being caused by Hamas themselves, she said. Booby-trapped homes, mines in alleyways, misfired rockets landing inside Gaza. According to her, the IDF proved Hamas hit a hospital because, well, the IDF never lied during this conflict, have they? She complained about damage to civilian structures claimed by South Africa as damage to infrastructure. But South Africa, Ms. Ragawan told us, do not appreciate how much said infrastructure Hamas uses for their military purposes. Hundreds of kilometres of tunnels causing buildings to collapse, she said. I always wonder when I hear about these tunnels that if there are so many of them, how come we've never seen any arrests made in them? Photos followed as part of her presentation, not of the tunnels though, but of showing missiles under a child's bed and a Hamas operative pointing a rocket launcher through a wall, as well as an aerial photograph of what they claimed to be a rocket launch site on the roof of a school. None of this excuses Israel's genocide, even if true, which there will be doubts over. How handy for a Hamas operative to pose for the picture. Is it a school in that blurry, grainy black and white photo? It could be any building from above. And as for the rocket launchers under the bed, well, how about the laptop with an IDF code number written in Hebrew on the charger that was found in Shifa Hospital, where the staff speak and use Arabic? Or indeed, what about the biggest IDF photographic gaffe of them all, in my opinion? The guns and grenades all stashed behind an MRI machine, a great big donut-shaped magnet that's strong enough to chew up hospital beds if they get too close to it. That can't possibly have been a setup, could it? Well, Ms. Raghavan, moved on to hospitals next, funnily enough. South Africa claimed that Israel targeted the Gaza health system, claims this ignores Hamas's use of hospitals. And then came more photos. Photos taken at, it's Shifa Hospital in the north of Gaza. It's Gaza's largest hospital, you may remember, and the same place where those weapons were found behind the MRI machine. And oh my God, they included the MRI machine photo. They literally presented it to the ICJ. That photo on its own, that physics-defying proof as Israel regard it. It should bin off their entire testimony that they've used such a risible piece of photography as evidence. Should undermine everything. She still wasn't finished, though. She claimed these photos constitute proof that Hamas is there. They don't. The IDF have faked too much imagery before to just take that word as read. Ms. Raghavan made the claim that the IDF arrested Hamas operatives there, but photos from the IDF hardly constitute proof. They might well be Hamas operatives, or, as we've seen Israel do elsewhere, they fake it by making prisoners that they've got dress up as such. And the director who they arrested weeks previously, the hospital director, has apparently claimed staff there are part of Hamas. But under what condition did he make that admission, though? Because we haven't seen him in a long, long time. In every hospital, the IDF have apparently found evidence of Hamas use, using hospitals as shields. Patients and staff are at risk. She made the ridiculous claim that they haven't bombed any of them. Israel has bombed no hospitals. Claim they offered assistance to move patients and staff. Well, explain those dead babies in incubators then. Oh, there was a photograph of them apparently delivering a new incubator. That was used as evidence. All wrapped up in plastic, all very nice and shiny. Through a hole in the wall it was getting delivered, did you know? And without any power in the hospital, as we know Israel's cut it off, how exactly is that incubator going to run? Also, if you want to help the hospitals, why won't you allow genuine supplies through to them? Why have you targeted ambulances and aid trucks and the Red Crescent and the Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières, killing aid workers in the process? We've all seen and heard testimonies from all of those aid agencies. Hamas steals aid at the expense of the population, she's also claimed. Hamas controlled distribution. Medical aid was stolen by them, and they hoard fuel, we were told as well. Israel cannot be genocidal when they've expended resources to tell people when to go and where to go to avoid the fighting, facilitating aid and providing ambulances. And yet still, we know you've attacked evacuation convoys and bombed people at a later date in the places you told them to go. That excuse doesn't wash either. This was, all in all, a tedious testimony, full of the same nonsense people have been debunking now for months, thinking it's good enough for The Hague. That's arrogant. It really shouldn't be good enough. But we now have to wait however long for the 15 judges to take to arrive at their decision regarding the provisional measures South Africa have asked for, which will hopefully mean an order for a ceasefire. I really can't see any justification for that not being handed down, given just how incredulous, incompetent and delusional a presentation Israel just put on. And if you haven't seen South Africa's professional outing in The Hague yesterday, where they crushed it, fear not. I covered that too. Watch this video next, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.